So, according to the World Bank report, India will grow at the rate of 7.8% in the next 2 years, and the report is bullish about India. So, how do you justify it?
In India, the growth is not picking up. At the same time, if the government can maintain the growth rates that we have today, it's a significant achievement. Our exports are still going down very significantly. I think if I recall, for the first time we have another negative quarter for the export growth rate. In that environment, the main stimulus to the economy can come from the domestic demand. And the government is doing whatever it can to stimulate the domestic demand. And even on that front, the government's focus has really been on infrastructure investment. And that's all that the government can do. And now the private investment is not responding well, partly because of weakness in the international markets. It's also the case that the government policies have not been turned around rapidly enough. I think the first 1 year of the government's mandate was largely a waste. And it's challenging to turn things around. You can't turn on a dime. And the stuck projects, stranded power projects, the coal block allocations, the regulatory environment, on the tax front, all kinds of baggage. Sort of government had to clean that baggage before they could really take positive constructive steps. And I'm really hoping that over the next few months, the momentum has now been turned around. And if the government can maintain the positive atmosphere going forward in the next 2 years, the 7.8% growth target is achievable.
So, the analysts say that these numbers are because of the change in methodology which has been adopted last year. And by the old method, the number is 5.2%. So, how will you justify both the numbers?
The number is a question of measurement. How do you measure it? And I think there has been a widespread support for the new methodology adopted by the government. And at least it makes the Indian growth numbers comparable to the growth numbers being produced in China and few other economies, basically the international standards. Now, it doesn't mean that by changing the methodology, you can improve the well-being of the people. The economic conditions are really no different, but it's really saying that how do you measure the state of the economy? So I don't really put much weight and the fact that it's 5.2 under the old methodology or 7.8 under the new methodology, that's simply a question of how do you measure the performance of the economy. What's most critical is the change from 1 year to the next. So if it's 7.8% today under the new methodology, if it doesn't become 9% tomorrow, that means really there's no improvement. If it is 5.2 under the yesterday's methodology, unless it becomes 5.5, 5.6 or 7, then there's no improvement in the economy. So I don't really think that the change in the methodology has much to do with the state of the well-being, the economic conditions in general, employment and investment generation. But the fact remains that economically, we are not really, our standard of living hasn't really gone up that dramatically. It was growing at 5% under the old methodology. It's still growing at more or less the same level under the new methodology.
So, with the unlimited mandate the Narendra Modi got in 2014, but still the government hasn't been able to deliver the real reforms. So, do you think that 2016 will be any different?
The government's first year of the mandate, in my view, could have been better than what it was. Not only they did not introduce any new bold initiatives, but in fact, some of the initiatives they introduced were counterproductive. They were negative. If you recall, in the budget of February 2015, government announced this application of MAT on financial institutions. That caused such a negative feeling in the country. In the first budget, the government was expecting, the public was expecting that the government will reduce or eliminate retrospective taxation. They did nothing. All they said was that they will promise not to introduce any changes in future, but the existing backlog was left to basically simmer. And it's only in the past 6 months that the government has been able to have an independent view. They've made very significant change in the bureaucracy, and they have begun to implement very significant changes in the attitude towards taxpayers.
So BJP is blaming the opposition Congress for the derailment of budgets like for the bills like GST and land bill. So, but when they were in the opposition, they always said that it is the responsibility of the party in power for the smooth functioning of parliament. So now is that they are tasting their own medicine?
Yes, there's an element of truth in it. But this is the name of the democracy. The role of opposition is to block the government policies and make the government look bad, no matter how good or bad the policies are. And this is the way both parties have functioned, and I don't expect any change in future either. When the BJP was in opposition, they did everything possible to block the implementation of GST. Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, and few other states, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, were opposed to it. And even though the BJP has come in power, those states are still not 100% in favor of the GST. The government has to have policies that make sense. And you can't blame the opposition parties if they are not in favor of implementing a flawed GST with a tax rate of 27%. And it took almost 6 months of argumentation and the demands by the opposition that we want a cap of 18% on the tax rate, that the government was forced to have the tax rates reviewed. But even as late as 3-4 months ago, the government was all set to implement the GST at the tax rate of 25-27% in the name of having a consensus with the state governments. And that type of a GST is a disaster. The opposition party today were authors of the bill that the government is carrying forward. But then what's the purpose of changing the government? If you have no fresh thinking, Einstein used to say that you cannot solve the problems of today by applying the logic that created the problems in the first place. Exactly. You need fresh thinking, and that fresh thinking is missing.